The night before my daughter's wedding, the groom's mother stood up at the rehearsal dinner, slid a leather binder across the table to my girl, and said loud enough for 60 people to hear, "Go on, honey. Sign it tonight, so there's no confusion later about what's yours and what isn't." Inside that binder was a prenuptial agreement that gave my daughter nothing. Not the house, not a dime of savings, not even her own car if the marriage ended. And my soon-to-be son-in-law leaned back in his chair, looked at her like she was a stray that had wandered into a nice restaurant, and laughed. "Relax," he said. "It's just paperwork. You weren't bringing much to the table anyway." My daughter sat there with her hands in her lap and her chin trembling, trying so hard not to cry that her whole face shook. She didn't say a word, but I did. I stood up, reached into my jacket, and set my own envelope down in front of her. "Open mine first," I told her, and when she read what was inside, that whole room of crystal and candlelight went so quiet you could hear the ice settle in the water glasses. If you're watching this right now, do me a favor. Drop a comment and tell me where you are and what time it is where you sit. Because 4 months before that dinner, a phone call from somebody I'd nearly written off saved my daughter's whole life. And a comment from a stranger might be the thing that saves somebody you love. So tell me where you are. I want to know who's out there listening. Let me back up to the phone call. It was a Tuesday in February, the kind of grey Pittsburgh Tuesday where the snow turns to slush before it even lands. And my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in almost 9 years. My younger sister, June. We'd had a falling out so old I couldn't have told you any more what started it. Something about our mother's house. Something about pride. We'd both let it harden into silence the way stubborn people do. So when I saw her name on the screen, my first thought was that somebody had died. "Don't hang up," she said before I could even say hello. "Please, I need to tell you something, and then you can go back to hating me if you want." I didn't hate her. I never had. I just didn't know how to take the first step back, and neither did she. I told her I'd meet her at the Eaton Park out on Banksville Road, the one we used to go to as kids when our dad got paid. I almost didn't recognize the woman who slid into that booth. June was 4 years younger than me, but she looked older. Not in the face exactly. It was something in the way she sat, the way she kept her purse on her lap with both hands wrapped around the strap, the way her eyes went to the door every time it opened. She ordered coffee and didn't drink it. "I left him," she said. "Last March. Took me 22 years, but I left." I knew she'd married a man named Roger back in the late 90s. I'd been to the wedding. I'd shaken his hand and thought he seemed a little too smooth, a little too quick to tell you how much things cost. But what do you say? You don't break up a wedding over a viewing. "I've got nothing, Dale," she said. "That's me. Dale, you understand that? Nothing." The house was in his name. The cars was in his name. The cars, his name. Every account I ever put $1 in, somehow it ended up his. I worked the front desk at a dentist's office for 11 years and never saw a paycheck. It went straight to a joint account I wasn't allowed to touch without asking. I had to ask permission to buy myself a winter coat. I'm 58 years old and I'm sleeping on a cot in my coworker's basement. I sat there with my hands around my own coffee and felt something cold open up in my chest. She told me how it happened, and the worst part was how ordinary it sounded. It didn't start with shouting. It started with him being helpful. He'd handle the money so she didn't have to worry. He thought her sister was a bad influence, so maybe she should see less of her. He didn't like how late she stayed at the company Christmas party, so maybe she should skip it next year. Little by little, the world got smaller, until one day she looked up and there was nobody left to call. His mother taught him that, June said. "I watched it. The whole family treated love and control like they were the same word. And I let it happen, because I kept telling myself it was just this once, just this one thing, just till things settled down." Then she looked at me, and her voice dropped. "Nora's marrying into a family like that. I've been watching her online, the Vances. Old Fox Chapel money. I've seen how that boy looks at her in the pictures." She reached across the table and grabbed my wrist, and her hand was shaking. Dale, if you don't do something now, while she still has a choice, she's going to end up sitting in a booth like this someday telling some stranger she's got nothing. Give her a way out before she even knows she needs one. Put something in her name. Just hers, so that no matter what, she's never trapped the way I was. I drove home that night with the wipers slapping at the slush and my sister's voice going around and around in my head. My wife Carol had been gone 3 years by then. Lung cancer, 8 months. The worst 8 months of my life. If she'd been alive, I'd have told her everything and she'd have known what to do. Instead, I sat at our kitchen table till 2 in the morning with a legal pad and a calculator, and I did the math on what one stubborn old pipefitter could put together in 4 months if he was willing to lose everything but his pension. The answer was enough. Just barely enough. The first thing I sold was the cabin. My dad and I built it ourselves the summer I turned 20, up near Tionesta off the Allegheny, 2 rooms and a wood stove and a dock. My dad fell off twice. 40-odd years of deer seasons and bad coffee and the best sleep of my life. A young couple from Erie bought it. I handed the husband the keys and showed him which window stuck and which step was rotten, and I drove away without looking in the mirror because I knew if I looked I'd turn around. Then the truck. A 2016 F-150 I'd babbied for 9 years, knew every rattle, changed every quart of oil myself in the driveway. A kid who just made foreman at a roofing outfit bought it. I told him to keep an eye on the transmission cooler. He shook my hand like I was giving him something more than a used truck. After that, I rode the 31 bus to my side jobs, standing in the cold at the corner of West Liberty with my tools in a duffel bag, feeling every one of my 68 years in my knees. And then I sold Carol's rings. I don't want to talk too long about that one. I sat on the edge of our bed with her wedding band and the little diamond I'd bought her in 1981 when I was making $4 an hour, and I held them in my fist until they got warm, and I told her out loud what I was doing and why, and I asked her to forgive me. Then I took them to 3 different shops on the south side, so no single jeweler would see how much a man was selling, and I came home with a check and an empty velvet box. I took every side job I could get. I rewired a hair salon in Dormont after hours. I cleared snow from the lot behind the funeral home at 5 in the morning. I taught a beginner's welding class 2 nights a week at the Votech to kids younger than my grandkids would have been. By April, my hands ached in a way they never had on the job. A deep ache that woke me up at night, and every time it woke me I thought of June with her purse in her lap, and I went back to sleep grateful for the pain. The lawyer was a man named Howard Klein, a careful little fellow with glasses he kept pushing up his nose, recommended by a buddy from the local. I sat in his office and told him exactly what I wanted. A house, modest, put in my daughter's name and my daughter's name only, set up so that no husband, no in-law, no court anywhere could ever pry it out of her hands. Howard took his glasses off and looked at me. You understand a gift like that, the way you're describing it. It can put a real strain on a marriage. Most fathers would just help with a down payment. I'm not most fathers, I said, and this isn't most marriages. And I told him about June. About 22 years and a cot in a basement. He put his glasses back on and started writing. We didn't just buy a house. Howard made sure of that. He set it up as her sole and separate property and put it into a trust with her as the only beneficiary, structured so that even if she married, even if money got mixed up, even if some slick family lawyer came after it, that house stayed legally untouchable, separate property, never commingled, with language in it that no spouse could ever claim a share in a divorce. Belt and suspenders, Howard called it. If you're going to do this, we do it so it holds. We found the house in May. A little brick 2-story in Bellevue with a postage stamp yard and a back porch that looked down the hill toward the river if you stood on your toes. The realtor wanted to show me bigger places. I told her this was the one. It wasn't about square footage. It was about a deadbolt that only my daughter held the key to. I signed the last paper 3 weeks before the wedding. The house was hers, free and clear, and she had no idea it existed. So that brings me back to the rehearsal dinner. The Vances held it at their country club, the kind of place with a coat check and a man at a piano nobody listened to. My daughter looked beautiful and nervous, and I'd been telling myself for weeks that the nerves were just wedding nerves. But I'd been catching things. The way Nora checked her phone and then checked the groom's face to see if checking her phone was allowed. The way she'd quit a job at the marketing firm to focus on the move, when I knew she loved that job. The way her laugh had gone quiet and careful, like a woman testing ice. And then his mother stood up with that leather binder and I understood I'd built the lifeboat just in time. When my daughter opened my envelope, she didn't understand at first. I watched her eyes move down the page, the deed, the trust documents, her own name typed clean and alone where an owner's name goes. Then it hit her, and her hand came up over her mouth. "Read it," I said. "Out loud. Read whose name is on it." Her voice cracked. "Nora Marie Whitcomb, sole owner." She looked up at me. Dad, what is this?" "It's a house," I said. "It's yours, just yours. Nobody on God's earth can take it from you, and nobody ever needs to know you have it until the day you do." Then I looked across the table at that prenup binder, and I picked it up, and I set it back down in front of the groom's mother. "My daughter doesn't need to sign away what's hers," I said. "She's already got more than this family will ever offer her. Hers, and nobody else's." Mother's face went from smug to white. The groom's smile dropped off like something falling off a shelf, and for the first time all night he looked at my daughter with something that wasn't contempt, it was calculation. He just realized the woman he thought he'd own had a door he couldn't lock, and that's when the father-in-law stood up. Lawrence Vance was a tall, tired man in his 70s who'd spent the whole dinner not saying much. I'd had him pegged as just another rich man's furniture. But he stood, and he walked the length of that table, and he stopped in front of my daughter, who was still holding the deed in two shaking hands. "You're a lucky young woman," he said quietly. The whole room had gone silent again. "Luckier than my wife was. Luckier than my daughter was." His jaw worked. "I married a girl from a good family once myself, and her father shook my hand and trusted me, and I spent 30 years deciding what she could and couldn't do, because that's how I was raised, and I told myself it was love." He looked at me, this old man with 40 years of regret sitting on his shoulders like wet snow. "I should have done for my own daughter what you just did for yours. I didn't. By the time she got out, she had nothing, and she's never quite forgiven me, and she's right not to." He put his hand on my shoulder, and his grip was strong. "You did a good thing tonight," he said. "I'm sorry my son is the way I made him." His wife came up out of her chair like a struck cat. "Lawrence, how dare you in front of—" He just looked at her, the longest, flattest look I've ever seen pass between two married people. Then he sat back down and turned to his plate and said nothing else. He didn't fight. He didn't apologize to her. He just stopped after 40 years in front of everyone, and I think that silence cost him more and meant more than any speech. The groom leaned over and whispered something to his mother, low and fast, and I didn't need to hear it. I knew that look. I'd just become a problem he was going to have to manage. The wedding went ahead the next day. I won't pretend I stopped it. I couldn't, and Nora wouldn't have let me. She married him on a bright Saturday in June, and I walked her down the aisle and told myself the deed in that lockbox was an umbrella she'd never have to open. I prayed I was wrong about the rain. I was right about the rain. It started the way June said it always starts, gently. The phone calls got shorter. My girl, who used to call me every Sunday and talk for an hour about nothing, started calling every other Sunday and talking for 5 minutes about even less. Then her best friend since high school, a young woman named Priya who'd been the maid of honor, called me one evening sounding scared to be calling at all. "Mr. Whitcomb, I don't want to make trouble, but Nora told me not to text her anymore. She said Spencer thinks our friendship is immature and that she needs to focus on her marriage. And she said it like she was reading it off a card." I drove over to that beautiful house in Fox Chapel unannounced. Nora opened a door in clothes I didn't recognize. Beige, buttoned up, nothing like the bright colors my girl had worn her whole life. Her hair was pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt. And before she even said hello, her eyes flicked back over her shoulder to see if anybody was watching her open her own front door. "Hey, Dad," she said. "What are you doing here?" We sat in a kitchen the size of my whole first apartment, and I asked her easy questions and listened to the careful answers. She'd decided to handle the household full-time. She'd agreed to put her own checking account into a joint one Spencer managed. She'd realized her old friends weren't really good for her. Every sentence was a fence post, and I could see the fence going up around my own daughter while she handed me the hammer and told me she'd asked for it. I went home and I called June. We'd been talking again, slowly, the way two old fighters circle back to being family. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time. "That's it, Dale," she finally said. "That's exactly it. No money of her own. No friends. No job. He's not hitting her. They almost never start by hitting. He's building a cage and handing her the keys one at a time and telling her she chose to be inside it." She took a breath. "The house won't save her. Not by itself. A way out doesn't mean anything if she's too scared and too turned around to believe she's allowed to take it. You don't just have to give her the door. You have to remind her she's a person who's allowed to walk through it." So I stopped waiting for Sundays. I started showing up. I'd drop by with a bag of those apple fritters she loved as a kid. I'd fix a squeaky hinge that didn't squeak just so I had a reason to be there. I didn't argue with her about Spencer. June warned me that arguing just pushes them deeper in. Instead, I just kept being her dad. Kept being a door left open. Kept saying small, ordinary, true things. "You used to laugh louder than this. Your mother thought you hung the moon. There's nothing you could ever do that would make me stop being on your side. It took until October. One cold afternoon, she showed up at my house with red eyes and asked if she could just sit on my couch for a while, and I made her cocoa the way Carol used to, with the little marshmallows, and she cried until she fell asleep. When she woke up, it was dark, and she looked at me and said, 'Dad, I don't think I'm allowed to be happy anymore.' And I don't know when that happened." I took her to see Howard Klein the following Tuesday. She told Spencer she had a dentist appointment. In that office with the same lawyer who'd drawn up her deed, she sat across the desk and answered his quiet questions. "Does he monitor your phone? Does he control the money? Does he decide who you can see?" She nodded, and the tears came, but they were different tears than at the rehearsal dinner. They were the tears of somebody waking up. "What you're describing has a name," Howard told her. "It's coercive control. It's not love, and in this state it's not legal." He laid a fresh document on the desk. "Do you want to file?" She looked at me, and I watched my daughter come back into her own eyes. "Yes," she said. We left with the paperwork in a manila folder, and I dropped her back at the Fox Chapel house, and here's where I made my one decision that night. I'll stand behind till the day I die. I didn't leave her alone with it. June had told me, when these men feel the cage door swinging open, that's the most dangerous moment there is. So I didn't drive off. I parked down the street where I could see the front porch, and I sat there with my phone in my hand and the engine running. Sure enough, Spencer's car was already in the driveway. He wasn't supposed to be home. I watched her go inside, and I gave it 10 minutes, and then the porch light flicked off, and something in my gut went tight as a fist. My phone buzzed. A text from her. 3 words, "He found it." I didn't think twice. I didn't go to the door to be a hero. I dialed 911 right there in my truck, and I said, "My daughter's inside this house with her husband. He just found out she's filing for divorce, and I have every reason to think she's in danger right now." I gave the address twice to be sure. The dispatcher's voice stayed flat and calm and told me units were already rolling 4 minutes out and asked me to stay on the line and stay in my vehicle. But then a window upstairs lit up, and I saw my daughter's silhouette pound her hand flat against the glass, and I heard, even from the street, even through the cold, I heard her scream my name. I did not stay in the truck. I was up that front walk and through that door before I knew my legs were moving. He hadn't locked it. Why would he? He thought he was alone with her. I heard a chair scrape and his voice somewhere above me, ugly and low, and I heard her behind a door at the top of the stairs, and I heard the worst sound a father can hear, which is his child saying, "Please, please, let me out, please." I got up those stairs and there he was, planted in front of a bedroom door with the little turnbolt twisted shut from the outside and his arms crossed like he had every right in the world. "This is my house," he said. "She's my wife. There's nothing illegal happening here, old man, so you can—" That's when the blue light started flashing through the front windows, and 2 officers came through the door I'd left open. The lead one, Officer Reyes, took the stairs 2 at a time and read the situation in about 1 second flat. The bolt, my daughter's voice on the other side of it, the look on his face. "Is that door locked from the outside?" she asked him. He didn't answer. His silence was the answer. "Locking a person in a room against her will is unlawful restraint," Reyes said, "and it's a felony. Step away from the door, now." Her partner already had the bolt thrown. The door swung open, and my daughter half fell into the hall, and she found me with her eyes, and she crossed that hallway and hit my chest so hard it knocked the wind out of me, and I wrapped both arms around her and held on like the floor might drop out from under us. "You're safe," I kept saying. "I've got you. You're safe now." I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted it. They put the cuffs on him right there. He looked at me over the officer's shoulder with this stunned, betrayed expression, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. "You ruined everything," he said. "You ruined us." "No, son," I told him, and I meant the word son like a coffin lid closing. "You did that. I just came to get my daughter." The next morning, my daughter sat with a detective named Okafor in a little room at the station and told the whole thing all the way back to the beginning. The joint account, the friends cut off one by one, the job she'd been talked out of. Every small daily erosion that doesn't leave a mark but takes a life apart anyway. And then, almost in a whisper, she told him something she hadn't told me. She was 8 weeks pregnant, and she was terrified he'd use the baby as a leash. Detective Okafor set his pen down. "Unlawful restraint, coercive control, terroristic threats," he said. "And a pregnant victim. Mr. Whitcomb, you got her out in time. A lot of these don't end this way." He didn't say what the others end like. He didn't have to. It took until February to get to a courtroom, a year, almost to the day, from that grey Tuesday at the Eaton Park. Spencer hired a lawyer in a suit that cost more than my first car, and that lawyer stood up and said my daughter could have left any time. The door wasn't really locked. Her fears were exaggerated. This was just a hard marriage, not a crime. Howard Klein let him finish. Then Howard stood up. "A locked door isn't the only kind of prison, Your Honor," he said. "My client had no money of her own, he'd seen to that. No job, he'd talked her out of it. No friends, he'd cut every one of them off. She was monitored, isolated, and financially dependent by deliberate design, and then, when she tried to leave, she was physically confined behind a bolted door while pregnant. That is not a difficult marriage. That is a crime, and the responding officers witnessed the end of it. The judge granted the divorce on grounds of cruelty and abuse. The house in Bellevue, the one I'd sold my truck and my cabin and my wife's wedding ring to buy, was confirmed as my daughter's sole and separate property, exactly the way old Howard built it, untouchable. She got full custody of the child she was carrying, a protective order, permanent, no contact. And on the criminal side, Spencer took a plea that put a felony on his record and his control of her, finally, completely, into the past. Outside on the courthouse steps, the February sun was too bright off the snow, and my daughter stood there holding the papers. And the wind lifted her hair, and for the first time in 2 years she looked like herself. She found me at the bottom of the steps. "It's over," she said. "No, sweetheart," I told her. "Now the healing starts." She moved into the Bellevue house that spring. I'll never forget watching her walk through those rooms touching the walls, like she couldn't quite believe they were hers to touch without asking. She planted tomatoes in that little postage stamp yard. She got her old job back, better than her old job. They made her a director and gave her a raise, and the morning she told me she'd negotiated for more than they offered, I had to go sit in my truck for a minute. My granddaughter came in July. I put that tiny red-faced girl in my arms in the hospital, and I came apart completely. 69 years old and bawling like a baby myself. My daughter named her Lila after nobody just because she liked it. And I think that's the part that got me, that she got to just like a name and choose it. No permission required. And I kept my promise to my sister too. June came up from where she'd landed in Ohio to meet the baby, and the two of them, my sister and my daughter, the woman who got out after 22 years and the woman who got out after 2, sat on that back porch with the baby between them, and they didn't have to say much. They knew. June started crying and waved her hand at her own face like she was embarrassed, and Nora reached over and held her hand, and I stood in the kitchen doorway and thought, there it is. That's the whole thing right there. That's what it was all for. June's doing all right now. She's got her own little apartment and her own car in her own name and a job she likes at a garden centre. And last Christmas, she bought every one of us a present with her own money and made sure we all saw the price tags torn off, free and clear, hers to give. I don't think I'll ever fully forgive myself for the 9 years we lost to a fight neither of us could even remember. But she forgave me. And that turned out to be the same as saving my daughter. Because if she'd stayed silent, I'd never have made that phone call my own. There's a man named Wesley who runs the hardware store down the street from the Bellevue house, a widower, gentle, the kind of man who asks my daughter what she thinks and then actually waits for the answer. He fixed her porch railing one Saturday and wouldn't take a dime for it, and he's been taking it slow with her in a way that tells me everything I need to know. The other day I watched him hand Lila a wooden spoon to bang on a pot and just laugh at the racket, no flicker of needing to be in charge of anything, and I thought, all right. People have asked me whether a house really saved her, and I'll tell you what I tell them. It wasn't the house. It was never about the square footage or the brick or the river view from the back porch on your toes. It was a message that came with it. You have a way out. You have something nobody can take. You matter. And you always did. And you don't have to ask anybody's permission to be a whole person. Those are the words that saved my daughter, and they didn't cost a cabin or a truck or a wedding ring. They were free. They were always free. The house was just how I found a way to say them loud enough that she'd finally believe me. So if you're out there and any of this sounds like somebody you know, a daughter, a sister, a friend who's gone quiet, who flinches before she answers, who needs permission to buy a winter coat, don't do what I almost did. Don't wait. Don't tell yourself it's not your place. Make the phone call. Show up with the apple fritters. Leave the door open and keep saying the true things until they sink in. You might be the way out somebody's been praying for and is too turned around to see. My name is Dale Whitcomb. I'm a retired pipe fitter from the South Hills of Pittsburgh, and I sold damn near everything I owned to buy my daughter a door. I'd do it again tomorrow and twice on Sunday, because last week I sat on that little back porch and watched my granddaughter take her first wobbling steps across the grass, fearless, laughing, reaching for her mother's hands, and not one soul on this earth will ever get to tell that little girl she has to ask permission to be free. That right there is the only fortune I ever wanted to leave behind. For a long time after the dust settled, I kept turning one thing over in my head: what would have happened if my sister June had stayed quiet that grey February morning? If she'd let our 9 years of silence win. I think about that, and then I look at Lila taking her wobbling steps across the grass, and I understand that every good thing in that little backyard traces straight back to one frightened woman picking up a phone and choosing to tell the truth. That's the part people miss. Nothing in this story was an accident. Spencer didn't end up in handcuffs because of bad luck. He ended up there because of every small choice he made to shrink my daughter down, and because of every choice June and Nora and an old man with aching knees made to push back the other way. I learned that decency isn't a feeling you have. It's a thing you do when it costs you. Selling Carol's wedding ring didn't feel noble. It felt like grief. Lawrence Spann standing up at that dinner and admitting what he'd done to his own daughter didn't make him a hero, but it was the first honest thing I ever watched that family do, and it mattered. Doing right is usually quiet and expensive, and you rarely get a thank you for it in the moment. I learned that love without clear eyes can walk you off a cliff. I almost did what too many fathers do. I almost told myself it wasn't my place, that Nora would figure it out, that I shouldn't meddle. June saved me from that. She taught me to watch for the small things, the careful laugh, the flinch before an answer, the world getting smaller, one permission at a time. And when the worst night came, that same hard-won clarity is what made me dial 911 the second I felt danger instead of waiting and hoping. Hoping is not a plan. Seeing the thing for what it is and acting before it's too late, that's the difference between a rescue and a regret. And I learned that the way out is never fast. It was 4 months of side jobs and bus stops and an ache that woke me at night. It was Nora clawing her way back to her own name an inch at a time, and June rebuilding a whole life from a cot in a basement at 58. Freedom doesn't arrive. You drag it home, tired and bleeding, one stubborn day after another, and then you guard it. So, if you take anything from an old pipe fitter, take this. Be the kind of person who does the costly right thing. Keep your eyes open about the people you love, even when looking hurts. And when the road is long, don't you dare quit. Lila will never have to ask permission to be free, and that is the only inheritance I ever wanted to leave.